I'm again asking, do you remember what was covered in the last session? If you remember, can you give me some heads up? No response. This is something which is strange. I don't know, but I've tried enough. I think explaining you, okay, there should be a dialogue that should happen and all, but unfortunately, it has not happened to an extent the way I was expecting. Anyway, so we started off with something called as an unsupervised learning. Right? We started with something known as unsupervised learning. And within that, we talked about a technique known as clustering. When I say unsupervised learning, it means I don't have the labeled data the way I was having during classification problem or the regression problems. I was having the target feature within the historical data, right? I was having the values of the target feature. So if it is a classification problem, I already know the number of classes that do exist. Let's say somebody will default on a loan or not, right? There are two classes, yes or no. Whether the given image is of a fruit or animal, right? Or let's say a bird, then of course it's a multi-class classification. The moment you go beyond two classes, it's a multi-class classification. But within the classification, we already have the historical data, some input set of input feature, and the corresponding output is given to us, and that is what we call it as a label data. When it comes to unsupervised learning, we don't have the label data. We only have the set of input features. We don't have the target feature. So in such cases, what can I do with the data? The problem we defined was clustering. So let us try to group them into different clusters. Cluster means grouping only, right? So what are the applications of this? One is market segmentation, right? Which I've given you. So company wants to do a target marketing, but they don't want to send emails or run the market campaigns for all their customers. They just want to send it to a handful of their customers, which are likely to buy the product. So they'll do some kind of analysis, right? Maybe they want to divide them into multiple groups and then say, okay, I want to target this particular segment for this product, because marketing also comes with a cost. So what they will do, they will go for clustering, and under clustering, right, if I have to group the data into unknown classes, right, I need some formalized approach, right? One of them we studied last time was k-means clustering, if you remember. K-means clustering is to come up with k different groups of the data set, right? K has to be defined. So, I mean, it's a challenging problem, but yes, when you are framing clusters, you need to define the value of k. K is 2, 2 cluster, K is 3, 3 cluster, K is 4, 4 clusters, and so on. I hope it makes sense. May I have some response, please? Now, if you don't remember, at least I am refreshing it. You can say yes or no. So it was totally a distance-based model, right? We make use of Euclidean distances. So initially what happens is you need to determine, I mean, choose a value of k. Let's say you are given a set of data points, right? And you chose k is equal to 2. So the algorithm will group them into two clusters. So you chose k is equal to 3, 3 clusters, and so on. And let's say we have chosen 3, k is equal to 3. So there will be some initial centroids this algorithm will pick, right? Initial centroids, let's say 3 centroids. And then let's say these are the 3 centroids, right? and we have some points like this. I'm donating points by triangle. So these are my three centroids, right? And these are my triangles are my point to which I want to group them. So what we will do as a first step is we will calculate the distance of every point with this. We are going to calculate the distance like this. So the triangles are my actual points. So I have to see the distance of every triangle from the centroid, right? Each of the centroids. So this is one centroid, right? This is another centroid. So I'm going to check the distance of this point with this centroid also. Distance of this point with this centroid also. So out of these three distances for each point which I'm going to calculate, whichever will be the minimum distance, I'll allocate that point to that particular centroid, right? So this is what happens initially. And what will happen is, so after that, you will see this is one centroid, this is another centroid, right? We have taken, this is another centroid we have taken. So some points will be assigned to this cluster, right? Some points will be assigned to this cluster, and maybe it may be like this, right? So probably this is likely to form one cluster, right? This is likely to form another cluster, and this is likely to form another cluster, right? Three clusters will come like this. Then what will happen is I'm going to take a mean of these 3 points, right? I'm going to take a mean of these 4 points and recompute the centroids. So I'm going to, so basically, if that point is from the data set, I will also take that point into consideration as well. So I'm going to take the mean of all those points which belong to one cluster. This will give me new centroids, right? And then I'll again do the same exercise, right? Calculating distances from each of the centroid. And then again, because the centroids have changed, so it would be possible the point which was belonging to, let's say, uh, this cluster right now, and this might shift it a little bit here. I mean, this centroid might shift a little bit here, and this point now in the second iteration becomes nearer to the other centroid, and so shifted to the other cluster. So every time the centroid gets changed, we need to calculate the distance of each and every point to the new centroid, and whichever is the minimum distance, we need to allocate the point to that particular centroid. So the moment, right, the point stops shuffling, of course, the centroids will also be fixed by that time, and the cluster will stabilize over a period of time. And that's the point where we see the algorithm has converged, right? So we have solved one numerical also in the last class, right? But nobody bothered also, right? Probably nobody came up with doubts and all. This was one technique which we have covered, and there were some certain drawbacks that were listed for this, right? Some drawbacks were listed, right? If the initial centroids are different, the cluster could be different. If the clusters are of varying sizes, then this algorithm may fail. If they differ in the density, then the algorithm may fail. If they are non-globular shapes, then this algorithm. So there are a lot of drawbacks associated with k-means clustering. Second thing that we discussed about k-means clustering was how to decide whether I should go for 2 cluster, 3 cluster, 4 cluster, 5 cluster, and 6. We did one method known as elbow method, right? Where we said, okay, there's some data set we have picked. I tried initially with 2 clusters, then 3 clusters, then 4 clusters, then 5 clusters, and see the variance, right? Sum of square things, variance within that one measure we took. And we saw that in the with respect to that particular data set, when I moved from 2 to 3, there was sharp decline in that, right? Sharp decline was like this. Initially, it was here when k is equal to 2, and this was a sharp decline like this. After that, it was like this. bit X here and then probably here like this. So this is the point, right, where I see that there is not major change after that, right? And this is the point we call, because it is taking a shape of elbow, then this is the point we say, okay, this is the optimum number of clusters for this particular data set. That's what we have done so far in clustering, right? Today we are going to touch upon one more technique on clustering, but little conceptual only, no mathematics, too much of mathematics involved in it. You will see the equations, but not any numerical problems related to this. Second method is something known as the Gaussian mixture model, right? Gaussian mixture model. If you have heard this term Gaussian, right? And if you have heard the term normal curve, bell curve, Gaussian curve, these are one and the same thing. So we have discussed so far k-means, where we are assigning the data point to exactly one cluster so far, right? Because whichever is the minimum, we're actually assigning it. But in real life situations, right, or real world situations, these boundaries between the clusters are not very clear, right? We see certain data sets where the boundaries are not very clear, and I have shown you in the last session also with some diagram that this could be the clustering. So when the boundaries are not very clear, what may happen is a data point may belong to one cluster with high probability and to another cluster with low probability. We are defining the probability. If you recall the classification problem with logistic regression, we are finding out the probabilities, right? Probability of so and so, because that's a binary classifier. And we have a threshold fixed there. And if that probability is greater than that threshold, it is belong to the upper class and then the lower. If it is 1 and 0, right? Let's say the threshold is 0.4. And if the value of probability comes as 0.6, of course, we'll say it belongs to class 1. If it is 0.3, it belongs to class 0, right? That was a classification thing. Now here, we are doing the similar kind of a thing, right? We are finding probability of a data point belonging to a particular cluster, right? So what is the probability of a data point belonging to cluster 1? What is the probability of data point belonging to cluster 2, and so on? So we call it as a probabilistic clustering also, as you can see the title. And the uncertainty which you see, whether this belongs to this data set or this data set, right? Or sorry, this cluster or this cluster, this is actually captured in this probabilistic clustering. This is kind of uncertainty, right? So instead of representing each cluster by just the centroid, which we have seen as in k-means clustering, probabilistic clustering assumes that the data is generated from a mixture of probability distribution known as a mixture model. So if you know the bell curve, right, it says, okay, this is a normal distribution, that there is 1 sigma, 1 pi. Sigma, what is sigma and mu? Sorry, sigma is standard deviation, right? Mu is your mean, and it normal distribution equation is defined around these two parameters, right? So there are multiple such parameters using which multiple models have come up, right? Multiple distributions have come up, and each such distribution represents one cluster. And now every point has a probability belonging to each of these clusters. That's the idea, and the major advantage of this approach is that it naturally it naturally models uncertainty in cluster assignments. Because if you recall our basic definition of clustering, right, we said we want to come up with groups, right, where the distance between the 2 points belonging to same group has to be minimized, while the distance between the 2 points belonging to different groups has to be more, right? That point we want to take into consideration. So when there are different distributions that are generating this data, right, each distribution is called as a cluster. And we'll find the probability of each point belonging to each of these distributions, and whichever will have the higher probability, we'll assign the point to that particular cluster. And this is capturing uncertainty, right? So we are not making a very hard decision, right? That this point only belongs to this. It provides a probability for every possible cluster. Okay. And you can say it kind of gives us a complete probabilistic model of how the data is distributed, which can be, you can say, useful for analysis, prediction, handling even noisy data sets. There's another extension that is added, right? This, you can see the third point, Bayesian mixture model, which is an important extension, right? Where you remember naive Bayes we have covered. The Bayesian techniques are used to estimate the model parameters. So just remember that this is a technique, right? And the additional benefit of this Bayesian method is that they can help determine the appropriate number of clusters, which is denoted by K, instead of requiring us to specify beforehand, okay, K should be 2, 3, and all, then check the cluster quality and all. That is what we were doing it. So in our course, right, we have a Gaussian mixture model, right, where each cluster is represented by a Gaussian or normal, or you can say a probability distribution. So yeah, this is what you can see. We have seen this, right? This particular curve. This is the equation, and you can also put E here and all. What is this? This is mean of the population. This is standard deviation, right? And this is how we represent a Gaussian curve, bell curve, and all. And we know the representations also, right? That mean lies in the center, and 68% of the population lies within one standard deviation. Approximately 90 plus percentage lies in two standard deviation, and 99% approximately lies within three standard deviation. So see, this is, let's say, 2 sigma, right? 2 sigma is see till this point, right? Quite a heavy number of points lie. 3 sigma may be close to this, right? So this is how we define it, right? Uh, So if you remember this part, right, some 68%, certain number comes within 2 sigma, certain number comes within 3 sigma. And this is actually followed in, I mean, this has a very, very practical use cases, right, in real life, this particular curve, right? So we have a mean and we have a standard deviation. These are the two parameters. Basis this, we say, okay, this particular normal distribution has this much mean and this much standard deviation. So kind of standard deviation finds out the variance. When I say variance, how the data is spread about mean, right? That is what the variance is. So standard deviation is nothing but the square root of the variance. Sigma square is variance, and when we write only sigma, that is standard deviation. Right? So what typically happens in practice is data usually contain multiple features rather than a single variable, right? So for such cases, when our data has because this kind of a curve you will generate for only one set of features, right? I am generating the height of uh, males in India, right? So maybe they might follow this bell-shaped curve. The height may follow a bell-shaped curve given that particular sample. But I might have a weight of the person, other features, because the models that we may, I mean, the kind of data sets we have, right? They're not limited to one feature. They have multiple features. When they have multiple features, so for each such feature, we have to come up with a Gaussian distribution. This is one Gaussian, normal, bell curve, whatever you call it, all are one and the same thing. So instead of uh, representing one Gaussian, we may have to come up with multiple Gaussian curves. And when we have that, right, uh, instead of variance, right, then we talk about covariance. This is another term, covariance. And we also come up with something called as a covariance matrix, which is represented by sigma, right, which you can see at the bottom of the equation, which captures not only the spread of each feature, but also the relationship between different features. So what do we mean by relationship, right? You remember correlation part, right? Covariance actually does the same thing. Now, what variance does basically, variance pick up, I mean, each xi value and subtract it from the mean value, right? And this gives you uh, a variance, how the data is spread across mean, xi minus mu. Now, I have one, let's say, x1 feature. I have another feature as x2, another feature as x3. So I can find covariance between x1, x2, right? Covariance between x2, x3, covariance between x1, x3. So I can do these things, right? So if I have to find covariance between x1, x2, and so on, so I have to subtract each x1i from the mean and each x2i from x2's mean, right, and divide by n or n minus 1, right, whatever the. So here it also will be divided by n or n minus 1. Let's take n for the simplicity. And now if this is increasing and this is also increasing, right, kind of a correlation which is happening, so they are positively correlated. So basically covariance value will measure how they are related, right, how they are related. So covariance is going to capture the features, the relationship, not only this particular curve, it is going to capture the relationship. So the matrix, right, which if I have two things, so one is if I have x1, x2, x3 here and x1, x2, x3 here, okay. So with x1, it's a variance, right? With x1 and x2 covariance, this is also covariance, x1, x3. x2, x1 covariance, x2, x2 variance. So this will also be variance. Rest all will be covariance because we are going to capture the relationship between two different features as well. So what you can see these ellipses which you are able to see here, right? Each of these ellipses represent points having the same probability density. You know the probability density functions which you might have covered in your probability and statistics course. So center of these ellipses corresponds to the mean, while their size, shape, and the orientation are determined by the covariance matrix. So circular contours, I mean the concentric circles, right? They indicate the equal variance in all the directions. So if there are certain points this side, there are certain points toward the other side. Whereas elliptical counters, right? Uh, they indicate different variations or correlations between the features. So if the ellipse is, this is kind of a circle, right? But this is more getting into ellipse shaped. Ellipse, so one side there is more variance, but on the other side there is less variance, right? Circle has equal variance across all. So why this concept is important? Because in Gaussian mixture model, each cluster is represented by its own Gaussian distribution, which is defined by its mean vector as well as covariance matrix. And the overall distribution is then modeled as a combination of multiple such Gaussian components. That is how it is, right? Overall data distribution. Now, let us move ahead and see what you can see here. Maybe it may be very, very scary, right? Looking at the equations and all, but we will simplify it to understand what does it mean. You should remember that Gaussian is nothing but that bell kind of a curve, right? Which we see in majority of the populations that we see in real life. Now let us see how these multiple Gaussian distributions can be combined to model more complex data sets. So single Gaussian distribution, many times it is not sufficient because the data may contain multiple groups with different characteristics, obviously, that we have talked. So instead of fitting one Gaussian, we represent the data as a mixture of several Gaussian distributions. Right, this is the equation which is mixing, and there's a mixing coefficient also, which is represented by pi, which indicates the proportion of data expected to belong to that component. So these mixings, you can say, they satisfy two important conditions. One is each coefficient is going to be non-negative, and sum of all the mixing coefficients, pi k, right, 1 to k, is equal to 1. So you can see this particular thing. So every k is pi k is going to be greater than 0, equal to 0, but summation of all such should be 1. So why we are saying summation 1? Because you know the probability distributions, right? So we want to generate a valid probability distribution, not go beyond 1. The figure on the right side, which you can see, that's kind of illustrating the concept, right? So what you can see is the blue ones, right? Which are kind of hidden. One you can see this is overlapped with red. This is the second one, right? This is the third one. So k is equal to 3. Three different Gaussian ones are there, and the blue curves represent individual components. The red curve you can see, right, is the overall probability distribution obtained by combining them. So we have k equal to 3, right? Meaning that data is modeled using 3 Gaussian components. So you will have 3 different values of these mixtures, pi 1, pi 2, pi 3, right? And now you see the combined distribution can capture multiple peaks. This is one peak, second peak, third peak almost, right? And much more complex in shape than the single Gaussian distribution, right? So single Gaussian distribution, either it is like this or it is like this, the middle curve, and the third curve is a bit like this. But the new one which we have fitted, it is more like capturing this, and then it is capturing this, and finally it is capturing this, right? Now the second thing is now every curve has got mu and sigma, right? Now, this one individual curve has got its the blue one, the individual curve mu sigma. This has also got mu sigma. This has also got mu sigma. Now, how do I get the mu sigma of the combined mixture, right? The new curve which we are fitting, which is capturing 3 different peaks. So this can be done using an algorithm known as expectation maximization algorithm. What it does typically is it iteratively estimates the probability that each data point belong to every Gaussian component, and then updates the model parameter until the solution converges. So it will check the probability of this belonging to this, belonging to that, and all, and then you know the expectation also, right? Probability we know, how to find out expectation you also know, and this is all covered in, I think, the probability and statistics course, that how to find out expectation, and this is what the probability is, right? But we're not going to cover very deep maths here. This course is about applied machine learning, but understand, like, this is an algorithm using which we can do that. So now you look at this probabilistic framework, right? This is what makes this Gaussian mixture model much more flexible than the other clustering methods, which are very hard, right? They only categorize a point to one particular, like if I talk about k-means, which we have studied, right? So when the clusters overlap or have different shapes or sizes, k-mean will actually fail, right? But here we have different model parameters for each. Look at the next portion, right? What you can see here is uh, the figure which you can see on the left side. It is saying single Gaussian, right? Single Gaussian. So data set is generated from a single Gaussian distribution. Gaussian means normal kind of a thing, right? So there's one large elliptical contour that you can see that attempts to cover almost all the data points. This may work when the data forms a single compact group, but it is not suitable when the dataset actually contains multiple clusters. Right? When the dataset contains actually multiple clusters, this because the last contour, if you see the third one, it's trying to capture everything, right? So single Gaussian treats everything as one population, which may not accurately represent the underlying structure. Now, if you compare the figure on the left with the figure on the right, right? Instead of using one Gaussian, we model the data as mixture of two Gaussians. Now, each Gaussian captures one of the two natural groups that you can see within the dataset. So the contours fit the data much more closely here if you see, right? Mostly densely packed. If you see in between here, there are gaps, right? But you see these are two very densely packed, right? So what does it mean is that figure 2, these contours fit the data more closely and they provide a more realistic representation of the underlying population. So this is what one of the highlights you can see of the Gaussian mixture model. Rather than forcing the entire data set to be into a single distribution, they are representing the data as a combination of multiple Gaussian components. And each of them has its own mean, covariance matrix, mixing coefficient, allowing them to adapt to complex data distributions. Now, this is probabilistic model, right? You check probability. Now, each data point is assigned a probability of belonging to every Gaussian component, right? So if this is the point, what is the probability this belongs to this Gaussian component? What is the probability that this belongs to this Gaussian component? Right? So this is what it is. Bit about, Gaussian mixture models, and then you categorize how do we go ahead with the Gaussian mixture models. So I just wanted to ask you, I'll not go deep dive into the mathematics, but conceptually, right? Uh, we can represent a data with two Gaussian mixture model, 3, 4, 5, and we have mixing coefficients from each of them. Each of them will have a different mu and sigma, which defines the probability distribution and so on. So if for any point which we want to categorize into one of these Gaussian mixture models, right, we check the probability of belonging to one versus the other. Whichever has the higher, we'll say, okay, this, let us put this into this. And this is how we are doing clustering using Gaussian mixture model. Any questions you have so far? I've spoken enough, I think, for last 20-25 minutes on Gaussian mixture model. I don't see a single question. So please let me know Is this point clear? What do we mean by Gaussian mixture model? May I have some response, please? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, what about the others? Divija Shekari? Okay, no response. This is something which I don't appreciate right from the beginning, right? Um, okay. Divija Shekari, would you like to respond? Shweta?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let us move to now a new topic. Clustering is over, right? Let us move to a new topic, which is uh, more of neural networks, right? Now, before even I start with that neural networks part, we should know that from where this idea originated. So neural networks, they are inspired by the research in biology, psychology, and neuroscience, where what scientists have tried to understand is how the brain processes the information and learns from experience. Human brain, right? Obviously, the first area of research was neurobiological studies. Scientists investigated there how nerve cells or neurons respond to electrical simulations. They were keen to understand whether a neuron, right, requires a minimum threshold before it becomes active, or neurons communicate, or let me put it in a different way. How do neurons communicate with one another to transmit the information? So, multiple objectives, right? That when these neurons get activated, is there any threshold for that? And do neurons communicate with one another? They definitely communicate, right? That we know. That's how the signal travels in our body, right? So, how do they communicate and transmit information? And these studies reveal that neurons receive signals from many other neurons, then processes those signals and generate an output only when the input is sufficiently strong. Input is important. So maybe somebody might have, let's say there's some small ant on your feet and all. Sometimes you don't feel that. The weight is not that heavy, right? But imagine if, let's say, there's some other type of insect which bites on your feet and all, then of course the weight is high and it gets, your brain gets activated that way immediately, right? So think of in those lines. Yes, when the weight is more, of course, it is activated, right? If somebody hit you hard, of course, it will get activated more, right? So this is all about neurobiological studies. Now, psychological studies, if I talk about, they focused on understanding how living organisms they learn, recognize patterns, remember information, right? So how do living organisms they perform different tasks? So these observations motivated actually these researchers to think about building some computational systems that could also learn from the experience instead of only following certain rules. And so third thing came is some psychophysical experiments, right, which combined ideas from psychology and physiology. And these experiments have helped researchers understand the behavior of individual neurons. First part, as well as group of neurons. How do they work together to perform maybe some complex functions? So based on all this, right, these biological observations where the experiments were, I mean, studied and neurobiological studies happened, physiological studies, right, psychological studies, physio, as well as this psychophysical experiment which we're talking about, right? Based on all these observations, uh, these two people, right, Warren Malloch and Walter Pitts, they proposed a first mathematical model of a single neuron, right? Mathematical model. And that too, we called as a model of an artificial neuron, right? Because it's not real. Mathematically, we have simulated it. And that came in 1943. You see, it's quite old, right? And their model was simplified abstraction of a biological neuron, where the inputs were combined, compared against the threshold, and then produce an output. The way the biological neurons, right? That's okay if some electric current is given to you. Maybe it's very feeble. Our brain didn't get activated, and nothing has happened, right? But if it's literally a shock, right, it gets activated. Your heart also, right? So that's the way. How do we combine the inputs? So let's look at further about these things, right? Biological neurons. What are biological neurons, right? So first thing is they're creating some artificial neurons, right? And then they want to create an artificial neural network. In order to understand that, that's why this slide is put, how do biological neurons work? Which is, what's the neuron? It's a fundamental processing unit in human brain. So the human nervous system consists of billions of interconnected neurons that you can say continuously receive, process, transmit information throughout the body. So a biological neuron has three main parts, right? One is the dendrites, which you can see. They receive the signal from other neurons. And these incoming signals are passed to the cell body, right? Where they are integrated and combined. And if the combined input exceeds a threshold value, the neuron becomes activated and generates an electric impulse. That's what it is. And this electric signal then travels through another component, right, which is axon, which carries the output away from the cell body. At the end of the axon, you see the signal is transmitted to other neurons. And there are junctions, right? And these junctions, specialized junctions, are known as synapses, basically. So the information flows from one neuron to another, forming a kind of a communication network, you can. So dendrites will receive the information from other neurons. Cell is going to process them, generate an output, right? And then through axon, that output travels to other neurons. And at the boundary, you see, right, then how the neurons are connected. There's a special unit known as synapses, junctions, you can call it. So you can, from a computational perspective now, how should I model these things, right? This is what happens in human brain. Now, from computational perspective, I want to build this artificially, and that's why we call it as artificial neural networks also. You can think of neuron as a simple processing element, right? It receives multiple inputs, combines them, and compare the result against some threshold value, right? And it will produce output only when the threshold, when that output it is generating is exceeding that threshold. So a neuron is nothing. It will accept the input, do some calculations, generate an output, compare the output with some threshold, and if the output is greater than that threshold, it is going to communicate it, right? I mean, some significant output will get, I mean, that it will get kind of activated, we call it as, right? So the idea has been taken from the biological neurons. And this kind of network, right, when we build a neuron artificially, and communication among the neurons is also possible, right? So this led the foundation for artificial neural networks. The next thing is we'll see what is that mathematics that a cell does, right? That is what we are going to see further in the session. Look at this another figure, right, which gives you some idea that what a cell does. So this is a kind of functioning of biological neuron. You can see dendroids, you can see the cell body, you can see the synapse, right? Axon, dendroids for receiving the signal, cell, the nucleus, right, where the computation will happen. In actual biological neuron, actually there is some biochemical reaction which happens, which generates the output, and we are simulating it with some mathematical model. Some biochemical reaction happens, and if that is significant, I mean greater than some threshold, you feel something, right, accordingly. And that's how this human brain works. Now we are going to mimic this in an artificial neuron. So information from other neurons, you will get it from dendrites, which will act as an input channels. These signals will be passed to the cell body, which contains nucleus and responsible for processing the information, right? So I'm just repeating. So all incoming signals are combined in the cell body. And if the combined signal exceeds a certain threshold, the neuron generates an electrical impulse, and the impulse then travels along the axon and is finally transmitted to another neurons through a junction, right, which is connecting neurons, is a synapse. Now, what you see in this part of the figure, right, this one, with how this biological process is modeled mathematically in an artificial neuron. So we have numerical input values, you see, right? So this input come from dendrites, right, in human brain when it comes to biological neuron. But artificially, we are supplying this. Some numerical value you can assume. And each input is associated with a weight also, which is represented by W1, W2, W3, and W4, 5, and so on. What these weights represent, they determine the importance of each input on the final decision. What is the impact of each input? The weighted inputs you see, they are combined using a function. There is some summation function is there, which computes the weighted sum of all the inputs. And this value is then passed on to some activation function, which is f. or denote, you can say it is denoted by f or denoted by f of x. And now this activation function will determine whether the neuron should produce an output, and if yes, what that output should be. So if this summation function, right, produces some value which is greater than sort of threshold, right, and this activation function will actually decide, right, whether we should activate the output or not. We'll see what is the activation function. This is very, very important. When to generate an output and when not to. So summation function is collecting something from all the inputs, while activation function will decide whether I have to generate an output or not, right? So summation is kind of collecting evidence from all the inputs. Activation function is whether that evidence is strong enough to activate the neuron or not. So you can see if the weight of the inputs is strong, obviously you get some impulse, right? If the weight is lesser, you don't get it. So it depends when to activate. That is how they are modeling. I hope it makes little sense that how we are going to mimic the functioning of biological neuron in artificial neural network. Is it making sense? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, further, let us look at this particular chart, right? How do we bring this? This is a conceptual thing, right? Now, let us look at this. What they're trying to say here is brains are made of multiple neurons, right? Rather billions of neurons. So human brain consists of billions of interconnected neurons. They are working together to process the information, learn from experience, and make decisions. That's how our brain works. And ANN, which is artificial neuron network, is inspired by this whole biological structure as such. But what they are simple mathematical models. Right? They are simple mathematical models. So everything now we know about this biological neuron, that this will receive the input, this will actually some biochemical reaction happens here, trigger the output, and then output, if it is significant, then travel through axon and communicated to other neurons and so on. Like this is what you will see in con. Now you should look at the lower portion of the figure, which is important. How do I simulate this behavior using artificial neural network? So each input, right, or each incoming signal that is there through dendrites, right, I can represent it by an input value. And this could be kind of, let's say, x0, x1, x2, right, which you can see here. X0, one input, x1, another input, x2. What is the additional thing? We are adding weights. What is the impact of each input? How much each input impacts, their importance? So weights represent the importance of each connection. Kind of, you can say, synaptic strengths in biological neurons, how strongly they are connected. By what artificial neuron does, it computes the weighted sum of all the inputs, right? And it may also add a bias term, which you can see here. This is V is bias term. It's very similar to if you see some linear regression model y is equal to mx plus c. C was nothing but bias, right? We said w0 is sorry, y is equal to w0 plus w1x, right? W0 is nothing but a bias term. Now, after doing a computation, the result is the result is passed through an activation function, which I told you. The activation function decides whether the neuron should become active and what output it should produce. And then that output is served as input to other neurons in the network. And that is what you see here. This one layer, there are certain neurons, right? Another layer, right, which is receiving the inputs from the first layer, another layer, and finally the output. So how many such artificial neurons are connected together to form a neural network? This is what this diagram shows. The first layer is the input layer, like this, right? Which will going to receive the data kind of dendroids. The information is then going to be passed through hidden layers. This is going to compute some output and give it to this hidden layer. At this point, some output will come. This will give to the next hidden layer. And finally, there's an output layer, right? This is how they are mimicking the working of biological neuron in an artificial neuron. They are calling it as artificial neural network, right? Now, let us look at solving problems. You see this as a linear classification. Why we are calling it as a linear classification, right? There are some data points x1, x2. We are taking it in 2D, and these data points are plotted, right? There is a green, there's a red, because I can linearly separate this with this straight line like this. So that's why the linear classification. So we can easily, there are two dimensions only. We can easily visualize the data, right? And this line might have an equation like this. If 2x1 plus 3x2 minus 25 is greater than 0, it is green, otherwise it is red. So this data is linearly separable. So there we can draw a straight line and separate the whole of the data, right? I mean, you are able to separate the green points from the red points. And this line we call as a decision boundary. Any new point which is lying on this any side of the boundary can be classified as a green or red depending on which side it lies. So this is one of the possible solutions, right? 2x plus 1, 3x plus 2 minus 25 greater than 0. And there could be one more, maybe because there can be multiple straight lines that I can draw in this particular figure, right? So this is one possible solution which is written. But this is only one of the many possible linear decision boundaries, right? Now, if you see the decision rule, which is 2x plus 2x1 plus 3x2 minus 25 greater than 0. You can read it as simply as a weighted sum of input features, right? If I say W1 x1 plus W2 x2, and this is kind of bias, right? Minus B kind of a thing, right? This is what you can see, and this is what our function is also doing, right? If you see our uh, function, right, which I was saying, this particular function, adding a bias, adding a weighted sum and bias. Now here W1 is 2, so I will write 2x1 plus W2 is 3, and B could be kind of 25, right? Or if it is plus term, I can say minus 25. So you see the boundary is comparable with the function that we are computing. And this is what a single neuron is doing, right? This is one neuron receiving inputs, computing the activation function, and then it activates. Now this is what it is, right? Basis that we are generating the output that, okay, if this value is greater than 0, it is green. If this value is less than 0, it is red. So basis, now this function has to activate, right? Basis this equation and generate an output red or green, right? So this is how single artificial neuron performs a classification. We call single neuron as perceptron also. You will see this term, perceptron. Now, if you look at this, this is the decision boundary chosen, and this that's what it is, right? This is, you see, this is 2, this is 3 minus 25. So this is the bias which is added, right? 2x1 plus 3x2 minus 25 is what they are taking it, right? And this illustrates a single perceptron that we have already discussed, right? So no need to discuss again. So this illustrates the idea behind a single perceptron, one perceptron model. Now, in this case, you see how to decide the decision boundary, that this has to be 2, this has to be 3, and this has to be 25. Probably we have manually selected it, right? So when there is some problem, we don't know these values beforehand, right? Because it was a simple problem. We said this is the kind of straight line that we want. So maybe this is what it is, right? It is simpler. So one of the most important challenge that we will face, right, is to learn these parameters from the training data. This 2, 3, and 25. If you remember regression model, right, we used to learn the weights W0 plus W1 x1 plus W2 x2 and so on. When we applied regression, we just want to find out these weights. So most important challenge is to learn these parameters automatically from the training data here also. And this learning process, we call it as the perceptron learning. Perceptron learning. And there are neural network training algorithms that are designed to accomplish this kind of a training. And you will see these weights, right? You may not have the exact weights, but these will be updated, right? These will be updated. And one of the models we have covered earlier is I've given you uh, also a question during the mid-semester exam is how to update the weights is using gradient descent method. Now, what this chart has to say about it, right? This chart formally defines what a perceptron is. A simplest form of, you can say, artificial neuron, and it serves as a basic building block of artificial neural network models. So it accepts a vector of real valued inputs, the input set of features which are available in the data set, right? And now what we want to predict, let's say, we have some features, student features, where the student is going to pass the applied machine learning exam or not. Now, input could be what is the attendance in the class, what are the scores in the quiz and assignment, what are the exam marks, and so on, right? These could be the input features. Each input is associated with some weight, and these weight will indicate how important each input is in making the final decision. The marks is of highest weightage, if you see, right? EC3 component 40%, EC2 30%, 70% is allocated to examinations, 30% is allocated to EC1. So that will have more weight. The exam part will obviously have more weight, right? And that is more significant because that is 70% of the marks rather than the 30% of the marks. So the weights are associated, and each weight indicates how important that particular feature is in making the final decision, right? So the perceptron model will then compute a linear combination of the inputs by multiplying each input by its corresponding weight. So W1 x1, W2 x2, W3 x3 up to Wn xn. And usually there is a bias term which is added to the weighted sum to shift the decision boundary when needed, because we don't simply want that bias could be needed to shift the decision boundaries. Or rather shift, I would use the word fit up at a point according to uh, you can say as per the data set, right? So that it becomes a true kind of a classifier, right? So the computed value, right, of summation of weights along with their inputs and bias term added to it, right? This is compared with a threshold using an activation function. And if the weighted sum is greater than the threshold, the perceptron will produce an output 1 indicating, okay, this is one class. Otherwise, it will produce -1, which indicates it's other class. Let's say it's a binary classifier. So this is what this particular chart says. Right? Let's look at and design a perceptron model for this particular thing. What is this? We want to design a perceptron model. Perceptron means with a single neuron. 0, 0 is 0, 0, 1 is 0, 1, 0 is 1, 1, 1 is 0. So if these are two input features, this is my output, right? So I want to come up with this classification. Now, can you first tell me, does this resembles any of the Boolean gates? Does this resembles any of the Boolean gates? Yes, please. I should have some input from your side, right? This is something very simple now. I am asking some digital electronics thing, which all of you have done, right? 0, 0 is 0, 0, 1 is 0, 1, 0 is 1, and 1, 1 is 0. Does it resembles any Boolean gate? Can you check it online immediately? I think that is also not even you are doing it.
Say and not get.
And not gate. Okay, you are saying if I put not against and, this is what it is. Is that the case?
No.
If you see and is say 0, 0 is 0, 0, 1 is 0, but if I do not, it should become 1, this should also become 1, this should. So it is not following that particular part, what you have said. Now, what should we do? Okay, think over it, if it resembles some gate or not. Now, let us look at this. What we have done is we have added, we have come up with this neuron perceptron thing, x1, x2, right? Its weight are w1 and w2 corresponding weights. And this is the bias term that we are going to add, plus 1. So w1, x1 plus w2, x2 plus w0, 1 into w0, right? This is the weight what we have assigned to w. So this is a kind of bias term, right? Now, we want to design a perceptron model which can work which can activate like this way, right? My activation function should be like that. So you look at this, W0, right? This plus W1, if I look at the first case, right? Multiplied with 0, because x1 is 0, x2 is also 0, W2 multiplied 0 should be less than 0. Should be less than 0, right? Because this activation function, if it is less than 0, it will produce this 0 class. If it is greater than 0, it is going to produce a 1 class. So for second case also, where W2 becomes, the way x2 becomes 1, right? So if you see this is gets same, this is same, still it should be less than 0. Now third equation is this, it should be greater than 0 because the output is 1. Here again it is less than 0. So this is what we have got. Now, can you tell me how to solve this? We want to find out ultimately W0, W1, and W2, right? X1, X2 are given to us. How to solve this? You know the mathematics, right? Solving a system of linear equations. You have done that part, right? There you are finding X, Y, Z. Here you want to find W0, W1, W2. I hope you are able to relate. May I get some response, please? Have you solved a system of linear equation? Right? Something like this is given to you. Then you solve it for x1, x2, x3, right? These kinds of things you have done or not? In maths, linear algebra, have you done it or not? I'm just put up some random equations, right? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes.
No, yes is saying, but it's forcefully that you are saying yes, right? It should automatically come, right? Linear algebra. These are the set of three equations. We have to solve it for x1, x2, x3. Have you not done it? What is the way to solve it? Okay, tell me. How do we solve it? You said yes, right? May I know how to solve it? Nobody will even respond. Nobody will
So we
even
used
search
to
immediately.
so we used to add the equations and making it two variables and then putting the third variable into the equation and getting the values.
Getting the
This is
value. So
the very top value, like a top view.
okay, you can also convert it into matrices and solve it, right?
Yes, sir.
So you get your defined solutions for x1, x2, x3. Now, when you look at these equations, my question is, can one set of values will satisfy this W0, W1, W2? Or there can be more than one set of values for W0, W1, W2, which will satisfy these four? Yes, think over it. Think for a minute. Let me have water in time. Hello? Have you thought of whether the one set of values will be there or multiple set of values can be there? Just try to plug in those numbers, right? So you have some value of W0, W1. So you want this value to be less than 0. This term is 0, this term is 0. What should be the value of W0? Can I take any positive value now for W0? Can I take any positive value? Hello. Is it that tough mathematics? I am unable to understand you guys sometimes. W1 is 0, W2 is 0. We want it to be less than 0. What should be the value of W0? Can I take it 0.2, 0.3, 0.5? Yes or no, please. Can you give me an answer
No,
for this,
no, sir.
please? Yeah.
I can't take positive value because it
You
should be
can't
less
take
than
positive
0.
value. It's a simple thing, right? I want it to be less than 0. So I can take minus 0.1, minus 0.2, or something negative which is less than 0. When I look at the second part, now second equation, this is going to be 0. So I am left with W0 plus W21 should be less than 0. So W0 plus W2 should be less than 0. Either I have to take both negative, or if I am taking one negative, other positive, from the first equation, I know W0 should be negative. So if W2 has to be positive, so I need W0 values to be more in magnitude, right? If I look at the third one, it says W0 plus W1 is greater than 0. So I know W0 is going to be negative, but W1's magnitude has to be greater than or at least equivalent to W0. W0 plus W1, and now you look at this. This should be less than 0. When I look at all these things, now I can come up with some values of W0, W1, and W2, and there can be multiple set of values that I can come up with. It's not only single value that I will pick up. Because the change here is, look at this, this is negative, W2 is also they are taking negative. So W0 plus W1, W1 they are taking 1.5. Now you can see this portion, right? So this fourth equation is also valid for that. So one sort of equations that they have got is -1, -1, 1.5, right? This is okay. There is one mistake here. I think this is W0 fine, right? But this is W1 and this is W2, right? So it should be W0, W2, W1, right? This is one possibility. There are other possibilities also. There are other possibilities. What if I take this as -2, right? I simply multiply it with 2 or some values I take that satisfy this, right? Again, so it's not only one set of values that satisfy these equations. There are multiple set of values that satisfy these equations. That is what they're trying to say, right? So that's how we design it, right? So I'm able to design this activation function based on this inputs and all, that this is going to be my W1, which is 1.5, W0 -1, W2 -1, right? And basis that I have generated my activation function. So it's not only one set of weights. Any set of weights that satisfy the four inequalities will correctly classify the training data. This is my training data. According to this, I'm able to generate. So there could be multiple set of weights that we may come up with. So we are not now, see here, what we are doing is we are not guessing the weights. I can simply say some weights I can take. Okay, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is, we are not doing that, right? And then we say, okay, this is what we look at. No, we're not doing that. We have come up with equations basis that we are doing it, right? So instead of guessing the weights manually, right, uh, we the algorithms will automatically search for the set of weights that satisfy these constraints and correctly separate these different classes. So that is what we will call them as perceptron learning, right? We have seen now, okay, this is what we want to satisfy these four conditions, right? But we want the model to learn by themselves these weights, right? And this is what we call as a perceptron learning. Look at this, the same thing, right? I think the same, there's no difference, right? There's no difference. Okay. Now, when to use neural networks? That's very, very important. When to use such kind of neural networks which have that activation function and all. So, we have other kind of classification techniques which we have covered: SVM, Bayesian, naive-Bayes classifier, logistic regression, decision trees and all. Then why neural networks? So when the input data is high dimensional means there are a lot of input features, maybe 100, 200 input features, right? And if you build a decision tree, let's say, that model is going to be overly complex, and right, and when you have neural network, right, so maybe you can have some activation functions in between, and then it will be able to model it better. So here each record may contain very large number of features. Let's say if I talk about images, right? Images are generally stored in pixels. Each pixel has certain values. So image may have thousands of pixels, right? If I talk about audio signal, there could be multiple audio signals, sensor measurements, right? Any text which is represented by word embeddings or other complex data sources. So there the dimensions are very, very high, right? And output is discrete or real value, right? So output is discrete when you predict something. You do classification, right? And whether the email is spam or not spam, right? That is what a discrete value is. And it could be continuous, estimating the price of a house, which we have talked about. So in both ways, neural network can work. And in many applications, the output itself is not just a value, but sometimes it is a vector of values. For example, let's take an example of image classification. It may produce an output to produce the probability of for multiple classes. So it may say with this probability, this is an animal, with this probability, this is a human, with this probability, this is an bird, or so on. So it's giving you some vector of values, right? And neural networks become quite effective when the data contains noise. And of course, real world data sets, they're often, you can say, suffer from the quality issues, right? And they're incomplete sometimes. They contain some measurement errors. They have some missing values. And neural networks learns from many examples, and they are able to tolerate some certain amount of noise and still make accurate predictions than the other models that we have studied. Right? Form of target function is unknown. Another important situation when the underlying relationship between the input and outputs is unknown or too complex to express it mathematically. So then instead of designing a model manually, we allow the neural network to learn this relationship directly from the training data. And finally, right, the neural networks are suitable when the prediction accuracy is more important than interpretability. Like if I talk about decision trees, right, or linear regression model, decision trees, you know why it has reached to a particular decision, right? And linear regression, it has got certain weights, right? But in neural networks, sometimes it becomes a black box. You have an output, but you don't know why this output. They are able to produce the excellent performance, but it becomes very difficult to explain how they have arrived at a particular prediction. While in decision trees, you know, right, this is the route at which we have tested, and this is the path we have followed, and this is how we have come. So very good traceability, which is not there within the neural networks. So they have a preferred choice where there are high dimensions, then applications like computer vision, speech recognition, natural language processing, some recommendation system, right? They achieve the high predictive accuracy uh, as a primary objective, right? Then obviously we can use this, right? And now let's move ahead and see this particular thing, right? There's a perceptron. There is another kind of neuron given by these two people, which we have discussed, McClupet's neuron, we call them as, right? So this was an earliest mathematical model, right, which they have given. And it assumes all inputs as binary, either 0 or 1. X is 0, x1 can be 0 or 1, x2 can be 0 and 1. So that was the assumption. And another input, I mean, another assumption which was there in the McClupet's neuron model was the all features contribute equally, right? All features contribute equally. So those were the assumptions, right? And rest of the function is same. You see, if all xi is greater than some theta, right, y is 1. If it is less than some theta, which is threshold, then y is 0. So x1 can be 0 or 1. All inputs are 0 and 1s. The weights equally contribute. So all of these weights, right, you have 1 here, right? So it is basically the summation of all x1 plus x2 plus x3. If it is greater than some feature theta, right, some value theta, this is y is equal to 1, otherwise y is equal to 0. So if sum of the inputs is greater than or equal to the threshold, the output is 1, otherwise it is 0, right? Now, when you look at the perceptron, it is more flexible and little more powerful model than this McClupet's neuron. It assigns weight to each of the models, means each input contribute differently to the final decision. More the weight, higher the importance. There's a bias also introduced, right? There's a bias, right, which is introduced. Uh, rather than you compare the weighted sum with the threshold is incorporated in the model as a bias term, right? And this is done by adding a constant input x0 equal to 1, and whose weight is w0, which could be minus theta, right? That's what it is. So decision becomes much simpler now, right? This is the bias term we have added. And if you see w1 x1 multiplied w2 x2, all right, if it is greater than 0, then this is the case, 1, otherwise it is 0, right? So now if you look at this I starts from 0. 0 means I am also incorporating this particular input, which is nothing but minus theta, right? Here there is no bias and all that we have introduced. And here we have bias, and we have also have weights depending on which particular thing contributes. I mean, which particular feature has more importance. Now, with this perceptron learning, these weights and this bias can be learned from the data. While in this case, right, these now this every feature is same, contributing same and all, right? This has to be chosen manually. Manually chosen thresholds and fixed connection. So it is not very much suitable for many real world applications, while perceptron is much more suitable for real world classification problems. So perceptron is an extension of this, right, with some added weights. It retains the idea of threshold based decision making, but enhances it by introducing learnable weights as well as bias. Right. Look at this particular chart, right? Further, what it shows is, again, now you look at this, this is how the bias term has been added, right? W0 x11. So summation of this is some activation function. Now you see this activation, it is 1 if this is greater than 0, otherwise -1, otherwise -1. So it has a multiple set of input features which varies from x1 to xn. There is a constant input x0 also, whose value is always 1, right? You see W0, right? X0 is 1, so it will be W0 only. W0 into X0. X0 is 1, so this is W0. So each input is multiplied with its corresponding weight and they are added together. The weighted sum is then passed to the activation function, which you can see here. So it could be a simple step function, right? If the weighted sum is greater than 0, the output of the perceptron is 1. Otherwise, the output is -1. And this binary decision makes this perceptron very much suitable for a two-class classification problem or the binary classification problem, right? And you represent this as this vectors also, right? Sometimes you use simple vectors, W bar into X bar. Right? This is what we use, right? Another notation basically. Now you look at this Boolean OR gate. This is Boolean OR. When the input is 0, 0, the output is 0. For all others, it is 1. And I want to design this kind of perceptron, right? Perceptron function. You see this x1, x2, right? W1, W2 plus some bias is added, right? As I said in the perceptron model, there is bias. So this will be 0 if this is less than 0. And this should be greater than 0 if it has to be 1. So for the first input, right, it should be less than 0, while for other inputs, it should be greater than 0. So if you look at this W0, right, it has to be negative. Only then it will be less than 0. While W1 and W2, they should be greater than W0, right? And each individual of them should be greater than, as you see, W2 should be greater than minus W0, W1 should be greater than minus W0. So basically the magnitude of this has to be greater. That's what they're trying to say. And in this case, W1 plus W2 should be greater than this, right? So you look at when you plot it, right? You have 0, 0 point. This is 1 point here. You have 0, 1 point. This is 1 point here. Then you have 1, 0 point, which is a point here, another point, which is a point here. Now what we want is this boundary, I mean, this point we want to separate, right? Other three are fine. If I draw a line like this, above 3 falls into one class, right? This point falls into another class. So there can be a lot of boundaries that I can set, right? And so I have to learn these things, weights basically of this particular line. That's what this perceptron model will learn and then classify it. So this is y is equal to 0 beyond this line. Even I can take this line which is drawn here, right? So a little below this will be 0, above this will be 1. That's what it is, right? And this is what we need to do. So maybe if in exam you are given this kind of a thing, right, you need to find out, okay, which is greater than which what, right, in order to do this. So that should be doable. So this is what your Boolean OR gate is. Now let's say I want to design XOR. So here if you look at this, right, okay, let me cover that, then I'll explain what is it. XOR is like this: when both the inputs are same, the value is 0, otherwise the value is 1. So now I have to design an activation function again, right? So W0 plus W1, 0 plus W should be less than 0. So when it comes to this, it should be greater than, so W2 should be greater than 1, W1 should be minus greater than, and W1 plus W2 should be less than this, right? These are the 4 points, right? Now, if you look at 0, 1 and 1, 0, right? These belongs to one class, the blue one. These red ones, can I draw any line which can separate them? Can I say, okay, this is the line? No, because here also there is red, here also. So what I mean to say is, when this was the data, right, it was linearly separable. I drawn a line, right? 3 points lie above the line. This was line 1, so I was able to classify. Now this becomes non-linear kind of a thing. I cannot come up with a hyperplane or a straight line which can differentiate my data. So what I need is, this becomes a non-linear. So you cannot come up with a straight line that can separate it out. So the XOR data, right, is not linearly separable. So what should we say now about it? Should we conclude that a single layer perceptron can learn only linear separable problems? So it can work well for the functions like, maybe we can say AND or OR, but cannot represent the functions like XOR, right? So can we say that or not? Because if I do AND will be 0, 0, 0, right? 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1 is only 1. So again, this was the 3 points will lie below the line and 1 above. So I can come up with a decision boundary where I mean, linear decision boundary where I can classify. So this is single perceptron, right? So single layer perceptron. So now look at this portion. This we have already covered, right? Plus 1, W1, W2, right? This we have already covered. This is, I think, W2 we are putting minus 1, W3.5. Okay. Right. So basically it should satisfy all these equations. We have covered this portion fairly in the other, I mean, in the previous slide, right? So what we conclude here is, it's become difficult that, okay, when the data is non-linear, how should I come up with a boundary then? That's another challenge. Now it is non-linear. I cannot draw any straight line which can separate these two. So this becomes a non-linear. How should I learn non-linear data points? Okay, let us look at this particular thing, right? What you can see here, this is not a single perceptron, right? You are able to see some functions here, then their values are being passed to the next and so on, right? What you can see here is there are two input features whose values are 1.0 and 0.0, right? If you remember this, right, I talked about hidden layer. This is a kind of hidden layer, the second one. And we are introducing bias there also. This is also a bias here, right? These are the input features, kind of x1, x2, you can say, but this is bias, right? So each of this is a perceptron now. Each of it is a perceptron. And the function is sigmoid function. Sigmoid is, let's say, f of x is equal to 1 upon 1 plus e raised to power minus x. This is what sigmoid is, right? We have covered it in logistic regression. So what you see here is you try to input values. There is hidden unit computation also. Hidden layer. So we are not directly coming up with the output, right? The way we were doing with single layer perceptron model. Now we have input, we have bias. The output from the input is not directly sent to the output. There is a hidden layer. There are hidden layer neurons. So first hidden neuron, right? What it will do? It is getting the input from this, and this. This bias, right? There's a weight also. This says 3.7. This is 3.7. This is minus 1.5. So 1 into 3.7, 0 into 3.7, 1 into 1.5, and sigmoid of that. Sigmoid of 2.2 is this, and this is value what we have got. So we'll get 0.90 here, right? Similarly, the sigmoid of the second, we'll get 0.17 there, right? This is what we have got. 0.90, 0.97, and now bias introduced. Now we have to compute this, right? We have to compute this. So 0.90 is the input multiplied with 4.5, 0.17 multiplied with minus 5.2, 1 into minus 2.0, right? This is what we have computed, and finally sigmoid is 0.76. So you see, now earlier we were computing one perceptron. Now from this perceptron, value at this perceptron, right? From this, so this input to this particular, this input to this particular input, and so on. And finally, we are getting an output here. So hidden input, you can say, kind of whatever the features we have got, we at the hidden layer, we transformed into new kind of feature value, which were 0.90 and 0.17. And these values are then passed to the output neuron, where a similar computation is being performed using the output layer weights as well as the bias. This process, we call it as feed forward. Forward propagation, you can say, rather than feed forward, forward propagation, right? Where the information flows from the input layer to the hidden layer and finally the output layer. So there is a sequence of computations that are being done to generate the output, right? And now you look at this, this is 0.6, right? Okay, look at this, right? This is 0, 0, 0, 1. So hidden H0. Now you can see that part, right? Hidden H0. This network implements XOR. Hidden node H0 is OR. Hidden node H1 is AND. Final layer operation is H0 minus H1 kind of a thing, right? Let us look at this. 0, 0, right? When X0 is 0, X1 is 0. 0 1 1 0 1 1, right? This is the final thing, 0 1 1 0. Now we want that, okay, uh, this is what we want, right? And we said this is kind of uh, not a linearly separable thing. So we are going to use multiple layers, right? We are going to use multiple layers uh, and then say, okay, uh, this can be implemented like this. You look at 0 0, hidden becomes hidden layer H0 and H1, right? This was the input features. We converted them into 0.12 and let's say 0.02, right? 0.12, 0.02. 0 1, 0.88, 0.27. You see this part, right? This is kind of x0, x1. This is h0, h1. So if you put, this is what this was 1 0, right? Now this is 0 0. If both are 0, this is also 0, right? This is also 0. The weights does not matter now. Now only thing left is bias part, right? So this is what we've got as a hidden layer. This is 0 1, right? The hidden layer h0 becomes this 0.88, 10, 0.73, 11, 0.99. Now you look at this, h1 also is being computed, right? This is, you can say, h1 part, right? Some way we are computing. And now you see, finally we are computing the output. 0.18, 0.33, we can compute it to 0, 0.74 to 1. So maybe we can say 0.5, it is greater than 0.5. Then output is 1 if greater less than 0.5. This, so kind of we are able to convert a problem like complex problem, non-linear separable into a linearly separable problem. So hidden node H0 is your OR, right? Hidden node H1 is AND, and final layer operation is this. Right. So you are chaining the process, right? Processing steps together. And it is just like more Boolean circuit, more complex computations possible when you add more hidden layers. That's the beauty of this hidden layer thing, right? Computed output Y is 0.76. Correct output, let's say it should be 1. Let us say, I mean, we always say, right, this is a model which has learned weights. So Y hat is predicted and Y is actual. Let's say if it's classification problem, right? You know the output already. So actual is known to you, predicted is known to you. You can compute the error. And this is my output, actual output. This is predicted output. I can take the difference and then I can compute the error, right? And then adjust the weights according to that. These weights have to be adjusted, right? That's the only thing that we want, that these weights have to be learned. Once they are learned, right, we can solve a number of problems, right? So now updating weights, it's very, I mean, that this concept we have covered earlier, right? Uh, with these weights, right, this is the output and this is the error. Now, in every iteration, we are going to update the weights using a method known as grading in descent, if you remember, right? Learning rate we were defining, and this is my target, this is my output, this is my input. So delta W, what is the change in the weight that I should do in every iteration, right? So it's an iterative process which will update the weights over a period of time. And once I get the appropriate weights, my algorithm will converge, right? So when the data set becomes linearly separable, right, and that is the weights we want to learn. So you now these are the steps. You have computed this, right, by multiplying the weights with the corresponding inputs. You provide S to the activation function, compute the error, calculate the change in the weights, update the weights in every. That's how we do it, right? How to update those weights. The ultimate idea is to learn these weights, right? So this is all about it, about this neural networks. There are three kinds of network architecture: single layer, multi-layer, and backward. We have already covered multiple things. This is single layer. There's an input layer of source, right? And there's an output layer. That's a single layer feed forward, right? When you have multi-layer, there could be one or more hidden layer. This is one hidden layer which is shown, right? This is input, this is hidden, this is output. This is what multi-layer neural networks is, right? One or more hidden layers are there. So this is one hidden layer, this is another hidden layer, right? And this is the output now. Multi-layer again. So they are trying to relate that our brains are made of neurons, they are connected, right? They transmit information. That's how it is. So we have some set of neurons here, kind of see they are activated, they send information to other neurons, they compute, if they are activated, they send, and finally there's an output. That's how the information flows in human body. And that's the same things is they are trying to achieve with multi-layer neural networks. Now, what kind of activation functions we have? So we have kind of defined, right, activation. So there are defined activation function. One is sigmoid, that okay, if f of x is less than 0, it is -1, otherwise it is +1 if it is greater than 0. There is a linear function like this, f of x is equal to x. That's a linear activation function which has a line. There's a ReLU function. If it is less than 0, it is 0. If it is greater than 0, it is actually equal to x. That's a ReLU function, rectified linear unit function, we call it. So these are different activation functions. You see leaky ReLU function, right? So if uh, it is less than 0, right, it is ax, otherwise it is x. So this is leaky ReLU function. Depending on, right, this is another function, hyperbolic tangent, sigmoid function, softmax function. Different activation functions are there used for different purposes, right? And depending on what kind of problem statement that I'm trying to solve, then I use accordingly those activation functions. If I am using multi-class classification, this softmax is largely used, right? Sigmoid is there for largely binary kind of a classification. This is also a binary kind of a classification, this particular function sign, right? And this is linear, this is ReLU, right? So that which one to use and all, when you pick up a problem statement and apply one of these and see, okay, what is the error that I'm getting, how much training, how accurately I am able to classify and all, then you will learn. But these are different activation functions, right? Which we were saying, okay, summation we will do, calculation, summation of Wixi we will do. But whether to activate the output or not, that is what this activation function, which will give you the threshold. If it is beyond this threshold, you please activate this, otherwise do this, right? So that is what is being done. So next is a back propagation, right? Which we will talk in the next class. Some conceptual things we will talk, not very deep dive mathematics, right? This is not very tough, simple thing, not very tough. If you know a bit of these function values, you need to remember, that's all. So we will talk about a bit about back propagation next time. Uh, what I can show you right now is probably, let me see. Yeah, I can show you something on decision trees, right? How to kind of implement decision trees in Python notebooks, right? You might have covered this already, but this is some data set, zoo.csv I'm using, which has certain set of input features, and also there's a classification given that is in a form of a number. It could be mammal, bird, reptile, fish, amphibian, bug, invertebrate, and these numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So you have number 1 as maybe mammal, number 2 as bird, and so its class type is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is kind of data set, right? First 5 rows of the data set. So this is what class type 1, 1, 4, 1, 1, right? So this is what it is. So we are trying to do some pre-processing. We are dropping the animal name from it, right? As you see, first the animal name was there, right? Now we have dropped the animal name. We have got this data set, right? And now we want to extract this input into 1, so output into 1. So you see, this will X will extract the input, Y will extract the output feature only, right? And then I am going to make a split. Test size is 25%, right? So 75 25 split is there. You see, the original data set was this 101 and 16, right? So training features, you've got 75, right? So 75% of the data is for training. 26 records are for testing, right? We are using entropy as a measure. That's what it is, right? And decision tree classifier is built using these parameters, right? These are the performance measures. Now we have trained decision tree model. We are predicting it. These are the predictions for all the 26 test data sets. How accurately it is able to predict? 96% accuracy we've got. And this is sklearn, right, which is kind of building a confusion matrix with the kind of classification that we have generated, right? Y test versus Y predict. That is what it is. Y test versus Y predict. Right? That's a confusion matrix that we have built. So it's a multi-class classification. That's why the confusion matrix is quite high. So for first class, right, how many true positives and other aspects are there, right? So classification report, then we are generating, right? Precision, recall, F1 score, all these things we are generating. This is some warnings. You can ignore it. This may be because of Python incompatibility. And if I want to visualize the tree, right? Look at this. This is what the tree is. If I want to visualize the tree, this is what the tree is. So first we are checking milk value, right? What is the entropy value there? How many samples are there? So these are the samples, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, total 7 classes are there. What's the class name written here, which has the maximum number of attributes as such, right? So, sorry, maximum number of records. So 30 is for the first one, which first one could be mammal, right? Here 30 is the total is mammal. So you see, when I check the milk less than equal to 0.5, so entropy goes to 0. So this is my leaf node. Immediately I stopped. Right here, I was having something, right? So you look at it on the other branch, right, where it is maybe true or false. It is hidden, right, not properly shown here. There should be an arrow from here which will indicate true or false. You see here now the records are belong to multiple classes. Now we are writing a class fish. Maybe this 15 instances are from fish. That's why we are writing fish, right? And then again we are checking. We're checking something. So entropy becomes 0. All 15 belongs to fishes. Again, this becomes a leaf node here, right? Some attribute test done, then back, then all. And this way we are classifying it till the time we get pure classes. Now you see here is reptile, amphibian. This is again impure. Reptile, amphibian. This is pure. All zeros, this last 6, this is pure, right? This is reptile. So here it is bird. Here it is bug, bird. So now we are getting all pure classes, right? Now we want to prune the tree. I'm saying, okay, limited to depth 4. So it will be limited to depth 4. So you see here, There is some impurity, right? But you see one instance belong to one class, 7 belongs to other, but it is less impurity, right? But this is what we call it as a pruning. So this is a simple code. You want it to be shared, I can share it with you in MS Teams, right? So very simple thing, because here it's all library call. You need to understand these things, right? What we are trying to do. We're just looking at the data set first, then we are separating out input features into one, which is X, output into one, that is Y, right? And then I'm splitting it, X train, Y train, all right. And size I have to specify. Test size is 25, so obviously 75% train. Then you have to call sklearn and build the model, right? So decision tree classifier from sklearn, and your build criteria I've said entropy. You can also set Gini, right? And try it out with Gini also. What is that you are getting? Try to draw a decision tree. You can also use GraphViz library to draw a decision tree. It will give you better results there, right? But you have to install it and all those things you need to do. I have code for k nearest neighbor, bagging, boosting, and all, right? Ensemble is there. So bagging is there. This is done using Iris dataset. This is very popular. You can find it on internet easily. These are the first 5 rows. So basically, it's a flower dataset. You have sepal length, sepal width, petal length, petal width. Basis that you are classifying a flower. So this is the first 5 rows. We have done the label encoding for that. Label encoding will encode this, I mean, this categorical into numeric feature, right? And this is what we are now doing. df.head, it's all ones, right? And we are trying to come up with a scatter plot also. You see, this is what we are getting. Okay. So case 1 is bagging, right? That is what we can do. We can come up with a bagged bootstrap data set and get away with it, right? I think you have a next class now. I must stop it. So I can share these things with you if you want, right? I will be able to upload it in the Teams. You can go through it, and if there is any challenge, you can let me know. And also tomorrow there is going to be a session, right? A lab session which Professor Om Shri will take. You can attend it, and if there are any doubts on any topics that you have, she can cover that also. Not an issue. But the response is very feeble. She's also feeling that, right? So I'm not sure how much did you get it today, but this is something which we can use for more complex non-linear boundaries, these multi-layer feed forward models. Right, there are more number of hidden layers which we have shown you, like using an XOR. That's all from my side today. Any questions if you have, you can raise it. Otherwise, we are good to wind up.